Welcome to the Scholar's Chair at Focus, an interfaith discussion concerning theological support for immigration and immigrants. Our guests are Rabbi Steve Weisman from the Jewish tradition, Dawud Rahman from the Islamic tradition, Reverend Kori McMurtry from the Presbyterian Christian tradition, and Dr. Safi Kaskas, founder of ICRA, the International Quran Research Association. Steve, if you would give us your opening statement, please. Rabbi Steve Weisman.
The Jewish experience, the experience of all the Abrahamic faiths who trace back to Abraham as our ancestor, begins with a call to become immigrants, to leave where we are comfortable and to go someplace else in search of God, in search of our legacy, in search of our future. And it continues throughout the Jewish story as it continues throughout the human story. When famine comes to the land, God gives permission first to Abraham twice, and then to Isaac to leave for the sake of being able to find food, and brings them back. Then later, when another famine hits and Joseph is already in Egypt, and the brothers come down and eventually reunite with him after all kinds of shenanigans, the first thing that Joseph says to his brothers, "It is I, your brother Joseph. Is our father still alive?" And once he hears that he is, he tells them to go back home with carts and oxen and bring the entire family down to Egypt, which sets us up to be migrants in Egypt for 400 years, until we are brought out from Egypt in the miraculous salvation at the sea, which takes us to becoming free people and to truly beginning our legacy, but not until we journey for 40 years in the wilderness. And to me, all of that is the theological underpinning of this. Before I ever get into the long history of persecution of the Jews that led to us being thrown out of countries time after time and being forced to become migrants, being forced to settle where we are welcome or not forbidden, learning how to live on the margins of society as a result, because that theological underpinning is so powerful. And the thing that makes it so powerful is not only does it permeate the entire origin of our people, but it finds its way because of that into all of our major holidays. And it finds its way into our ethics in the form of that 36 times repeated injunction that we must respect and be good to the stranger in our own land, knowing what it's like to be a stranger before we were in Egypt. And there's a lot more we can talk about there, but I'm going to leave it right there, because I think that's the foundation for all of us, and let others build on that foundation strongly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Our next presenter will be Imam Dawud Abdur Rahman. Dawud, would you give us your opening statement, please?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. With the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. I just want to remind everybody that immigration, or hijrah, is fundamental to Islamic theology and establishment of faith communities as evidenced in the prophetic tradition and the establishment of Muslim communities. Allah has reminded us in the Great Reminder, another way of thinking about the Quran, the final revelation, according to Islamic theology to all mankind, that the earth is spacious and that the entire earth is a masjid, meaning that the entire earth is a place that's eligible for prostration or prayer. The three root letters that correspond to the English letters SLM, or Salima, that are the root of the Arabic word Salam, Islam, Al-Islam, mean to be safe and sound. Al-Islam can be understood as a condition of peace, safety, security, and freedom. I am of the school of thought that after the belief in one God, Tawheed, the imperative in the Quran at the community level is for the advocacy of compassionate justice. The following prophets had prophetic missions that included hijrah or migration, Jonah or Yunus, Hagar and Ishmael, Moses or Musa, Isa or Jesus, peace be upon him, Muhammad, peace be upon him, Peace be upon all of the prophets of Allah. I'll leave out the details of their various migrations, but as Rabbi Steve has mentioned, this is part of our shared tradition. Um, the Muslim community was reestablished in Arabia as a result of the revelation of the Quran and the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The Muslim community undertook two migrations, first to Ethiopia and then later to Medina after because of persecution in Mecca. The Muslims who were fleeing persecution in Mecca sought and received asylum in Ethiopia. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had informed his followers that in Ethiopia there was a Christian king who ruled with justice and mercy, and indeed he did grant asylum to that early Muslim community. The Hijra, or the immigration to Medina, is the point at which the Islamic calendar starts. The Muslim community at that time realized that their condition completely changed after the Hijra, or the migration from Mecca to Medina, and the establishment of the Islamic community there. Muslims are urged to assist people who are in oppressive conditions, urging them to help people who are oppressed and can't find a way out for themselves. The Quran is a standard based on our belief system as a universal standard for Tawheed and compassionate justice. Allah is revealed in the Quran by the English meaning: "O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives, whether one is rich or poor. Allah is more worthy of both. So follow not personal inclination, lest ye not be just. And if you distort your testimony or refuse to give it, then indeed Allah is ever with you, what you do, acquainted." So there's no surprise that many clergy across all faith communities, when they look at the various situations around the world, in the Americas, in Africa, in Asia, join together to urge for justice and compassion and forgiveness and mercy for people who feel they have no other choice but to undertake treacherous, life-threatening journeys to leave their homes to go to some place of peace, safety, and security. And this is consistent in all of the faith conditions and is reinforced in the Quran. I'd like to close with an ayat from the Quran and then a dua or prayer from the Prophet Muhammad. "O mankind, fear your Lord who created you from one soul and created from its mate and dispersed from both of them many men and women. Fear Allah, have consciousness of Allah, through whom you ask one another, and the wombs. And indeed, Allah is ever over you, an observer." And I'd like to close with a dua or a prayer from the Prophet Muhammad. "O Allah, we seek thy refuge from anxiety and grief. We seek thy refuge from lack of strength and laziness. We seek thy refuge from cowardice and ungodliness. And O Allah, we seek thy refuge from being overpowered by debt and the oppression of men. O Allah, suffice us with what is lawful, keep from us what is prohibited, and with thy grace, make us free from want of what is beside thee. Amen." And I'll conclude my comments, Khalil and panel, and I look forward to hearing the other presenters and engaging in the following discussion. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Dawud, for your brief and insightful opening statement. The next presenter will be Dr. Kori Phillips McMurtry.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation that is, I think, really prevalent for this time, but as all time since the beginning of our sacred scriptures, when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. The human family has been in search of place and belonging and home. I have, when I received your invitation to participate in this dialogue, I started reading a book. I picked up one of the many unread books that come to the shelves. I thought, well, this sounds like the perfect time to read it. From Karen Gonzalez. She has a book called Beyond Welcome: Centering Immigrants in Our Christian Response to Immigration. And some of her thoughts really helped me to craft my conversation with you all today. But offering, as some of you have mentioned, that the biblical narrative, our sacred scriptures, they are filled with stories of human movement, of migration, of people moving from one land to another in search of safety, security, And it is interesting to note that the idea of human movement, it's not, judgment is not cast upon movement in all of these stories. It's more of a fact of a thing that happens with humanity. We move from place to place. And even when we think about our call to how we respond to it in religious spaces, our ideas, I think, perhaps in the United States might shift a little bit if we were to think about the way Americans move around from place to place. How often do we move from the place in which we were born to another place for economics, for opportunity, in search of those same needs of place and belonging? And sometimes it is out of security or fear, or in the biblical terms today in worship, we've been moving through Jeremiah and talking about the exile. But if we don't call it migration, we just call it moving. We call it going somewhere. And because of the way we've crafted our borders. And so I guess my question for the group is thinking about how our attitudes would change with the language that we use around not only the way we label or talk about movement, but the way that we tell our stories in our sacred scripture of movement. It's rife with stories of moving from place to place. And I would like to note there's so many texts in the Bible that talk about welcoming and compassion and all of this, but I wanted to go with a New Testament, bringing my the Christian speaker to the panel. I wanted to lean into there's a letter that Paul writes to the church, the Philippians, his letter to the Philippians, in which he's talking about sort of Roman citizenship, and he writes that we are citizens of heaven, and to align our citizenship not necessarily with the Roman location or the Roman Empire, but anyway, Philippians 3:20, we, however, are citizens of heaven, and we eagerly await for our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, to come from heaven. And while that is often, I think, interpreted for a future thinking about, in heaven beyond what is now, I think in taking that and sort of thinking about this conversation, it's not just a later, it's a right now. How can we view our citizenship and form our identity with that as our core principle, not just later will we, is that the focus? So that concludes my remarks for now, but I'm happy to pull into the conversation as we move through it.
Excellent, Kori. Thank you. I tell you, there's a lot to discuss, and I know these ideas are really very complicated, particularly right at this moment. Our next presenter is Dr. Safi Kaskas. Would you make your opening statement, sir?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Actually, this topic that we're going to discuss today, from the minute I was invited, created all kind of emotion within me. First of all, I'm from Beirut, Lebanon. I was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon. Then in 1969, I decided consciously to immigrate to the United States because I heard it's a country of neighbors. And a country of neighbors is a key term for me because I learned that the two greatest commandments were to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and all your strength, and to love your neighbor like yourself. And I want it to be where neighbors love neighbors. And to tell you the truth, when I came to the United States, I had $69 in my pocket. I spoke Arabic and French and no English, and moved to Birmingham, Alabama. That's way down there. And if it wasn't for the kindness of my neighbors in the South, I wouldn't have made it. So it was love your neighbor like yourself that made me who I am today. I experienced the kindness of those neighbors. Now, having said this, all my comments are going to be based on the fact that I am from the Middle East. Then I decided to migrate, not because I didn't like Lebanon. Lebanon, to me, it's still the prettiest place in the world, the most blessed place in the world, a place that is beautiful in every way, shape, and form. And actually, there is a story about this that Lebanese like to say, to talk about. They say God created earth and he sprinkled some beauty here and there. And at the end, he found that he still have some in his hand, and he spread it all, and it was all in Lebanon. So that's why Lebanon is very beautiful. So to have to leave Lebanon, I have to have good reasons to leave Lebanon. So I have to be very frank with you and very straight. I was 4 years old, when my mom used to take me to visit her some relatives, and I used to play outside because it was like an open place, playing ground like for me. And one day when I was 4 years old, I came and the place was full of tents. And I asked, who are these people? Why are they here? Why are they taking my playing ground? Oh, they're Palestinians. They were kicked out of Israel. So this is something that grew up with me since I was 4 years old. And it still eats with me in my plate 3 times a day. I can't forget it. Unless I see justice, I will still have to talk about it. Justice is to recognize a human being like my neighbor. That's what I learned from Jesus, who was, by the way, a Jew. And this is what I learned from the Quran, which, by the way, I believe it's the word of God. So, but coming to the United States and living here, I thought we were living under a constitution that teaches that everybody is equal. And I'm going through discoveries for the last 20, 30 years that I've been living here. I discovered that Geronimo used to live here. Have you heard of Geronimo? He used to live here. And he's not even a citizen. He's not even accepted as a full human being. He was a savage. And I can't accept that. Neither my holy books that I read, and I read all holy books, and they're all mine, ending with the Quran. My holy books don't accept that. Common sense doesn't accept that. My conscience doesn't accept that. I can't feel that I am a citizen in a place where the Native Americans are not, and cannot be full citizens. So whether I'm talking about the Palestinians, whether I'm talking about the Native Americans, and I can talk about the Native Australians and all kind of things. I can talk about the Iraqis that became refugees in their own country and after we invaded their place. And I challenge anybody to give me one good reason why we went there. Anyway, I don't like to talk too much. I like to talk too much, but I don't think he would let me. So basically, I'm going to stop right here, and maybe we can have a debate rather than brag about what our holy books teach that we're not implementing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Professor Kaskas, our topic, of course, is really how we are addressing immigrants and how we are dealing with immigration. And you're answering that question. You're definitely on target. But I want to see if there are others who have questions who would like to maybe focus in on something that I have not, because this is a very broad topic. It is in the public media as we speak, and I can't tell you how many times I have seen universities deal with this issue. And it is a much more complicated issue than I even imagined, especially when you're dealing with public policy in the midst of trying to focus in on the morals that are in our tradition that's at stake, and it commands us to address it. I want to ask the first question to everyone, though. I want to see should people attempting to escape oppression and persecution be protected by our public policy? Is that something that you think is within our moral tradition, and what moral principles at stake to cause us to be a sanctuary of sort to people who are oppressed? Steve, I'll go with you.
Thank you, Khalil. I was going to jump in if you didn't.
Right.
Because I want to start to answer that with your friend and mine, Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
Safi just made mention of it. All men are created equal by their maker and endowed with the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You don't need to be oppressed to be welcome under those words if we take them for what they are and expand them out to what they need to be, which is not just all men, and to take all men and women seriously and everyone in between. The fact that the man who wrote those words kept slaves all of his life, even while he was railing against slavery as an entity. The challenge is not immigration. Immigration has existed since before Abraham. Immigration existed in a world where the nomad was the norm and the settled agriculturalist was not. And in this country still, in the words of Rodgers and Hammerstein, the farmer and the cowhand must be friends. Because we're still struggling for who controls the land here and everywhere. In the aftermath of the worst global war in the history of humanity, we lived in a time when lines were drawn on maps by bureaucrats who'd never stepped foot in the land that they were dividing. And as a result, victims of that war were not allowed to return to a land that they knew from their own faith tradition was their home. And they were taken out of barbed wire camps and put into other barbed wire camps until the world finally said enough is enough. The problem is not the immigrant. The problem is not the reason why the immigrant becomes an immigrant. Nobody should have to challenge, Safi, why you chose of your own volition to come here. My parents, grandparents chose to come here.
Right.
The only people who didn't come here as immigrants came here against their will as immigrants, or were born here to Aboriginals. And as you correctly pointed out, they're the ones who are not considered to be citizens. We give them their own land and we've taken the rest of it. It's a challenge, and I think we sometimes confuse the cart for the horse. Those of us who were at the African American Museum earlier this week, and there's a few people on this call who were there together, were reminded that as much of a breakthrough in looking at American history as the 1619 Project was in changing our perspective on where American history begins. The truth is that if you start at 1619, when those folks are already on a boat off the shores of what is now Virginia, you've already stripped them of their culture, of their context, of their tribal identity, and you've turned them into cardboard representations, which is why it was so easy for others to turn them into slaves. And we've never gotten past that. We're now trying to roll back the 1619 project
Why is
when it didn't go far enough.
Steve, I wanted to ask, I want to ask Kori. Kori, why is it that you think that we are dropping the moral principle of simply helping someone who's oppressed? Why is it that we keep on dropping the ball as a society? Is it greed that powerful that we cause us to just? I mean, we are talking about returning thousands and thousands of human beings back to the country of their origin, back to a condition that is oppressive to them. And instead of being creative and finding new ways of integrating them into our society, we are returning them back to an oppressive situation. Why so?
It is unjust. It is not who God wants us to be, and it is greed, and it is power, and it is comfortability. People afraid to go to stand up for what is right. People afraid to do something that if it means that they have to get less, as though if they have to step back and give up some power, it's a way in which people, I think you're right. I mean, greed, it is greed and competition and rivalry are these like core qualities that pit people against people.
Dawud, what say you? Should we return people back to oppressive situation?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I don't think anybody on this call is in a position to actually totally change the policy, but I think what we have to be realistic about is the political and economic dynamics that have brought us to this point. So we just, and I think part of the role of faith communities is to continue to hold up the ideal standard, the ideas of being compassionate, of being just, of being patient and merciful. But if you do not ignore the reality that we just had an election where the majority of the people through the Electoral College and the popular vote voted for a platform where one of the main policies that was being advocated was a tougher, more enforced immigration policy. And that was driven in large part by people's feeling of, I can't feed myself here. Eggs are too expensive. Gas is getting too high. I don't see life getting better for my children. And even though people might, I'm sure they are, this is still a much more religious, America's more religious than Europe, still generally, as I understand it. People go to church, they go to the synagogue, they'll go to the masjid, but at some point you kind of vote your economic interests, and your political interests, and that's where you are. So the ideal answer is, of course not. You read the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, you read the great thinkers of whatever you want to refer to. How could you do this? This is not reasonable, you know what I mean? But if you don't figure out how to develop coalitions to deal with the root causes that resulted in this election, right? And the policies that we're now seeing implemented, then I think it's just going to be just an academic discussion.
Yes, and that's what it seems to be happening. It's just it seems to be action without any moral conscience at all. Dr. Kaskas, how should you think? How should we treat the immigrant? I mean, what would be the ideal situation for treating? If you were saying that I have I have I'm in control, or maybe you're in the White House or something. How should we treat the immigrant?
Well, if I was in the White House, and probably the first thing I'll do, I will go back and try to remember what my holy books are teaching me. And I challenge anybody to find anywhere in the Bible, in the Gospel, or in the Quran, anything that will discriminate between one human being and the other. To start with, I will start from a premise. This earth does not belong to me. It belongs to its creator. I'm here for a short while, and I'm going to be exiting after a while. So I might as well get ready for a day of judgment. And to get ready for a day of judgment, my holy book, the Quran, teach me that I have to be good to everybody I encounter, and I have to leave earth better than what I found it to be. So in order to do this, I have to be kind to everybody. And to be kind to everybody, I would look to start with at my military budget. And I will invite leaders from all over the world. And I will tell them, if we all get together and we reduce each country's military budget by 10%, the balance of power would remain the same, because we all reduce by the same percentage. But the trillions of dollars we will save can feed all the poor everywhere on earth and give them a good reason to stay where they are, instead of moving from where they can't find food to where life is plentiful, where food is plentiful. If you want everybody to live where they are today, give them prosperity, give them justice where they are. We already talked about the issues that will make people hold tight to where they live. So the problem is not the immigrant. The problem is the human greed. I want it all for me, not for my neighbor. But if I love for myself what I truly love for my neighbor, then I will be happy and my neighbor will be happy. You know?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, so basically, let's don't talk about the problem of immigration.
Right.
Let's talk about the problem of greed. Human greed is the problem, not the immigration. The poor is not the problem. The very wealthy who refuse to pay taxes but insist on firing entire departments of the government is the problem. Equitability doesn't exist. Fairness doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Humility doesn't exist.
And see the other, then we can do things. Sorry, Steve.
Sorry, Safi. Humility doesn't exist.
Humility doesn't exist. Yes, sir. Look, Khalil keep calling me professor. I'm not a professor. I'm a servant. I serve students when I'm teaching. And the president needs to be a servant. He's serving us when he's presiding. We didn't elect him to be the king. We elected him to be our servant. If he doesn't want to serve, he needs to move out. Simple.
Can we talk about the fact that the oppressed people are, particularly the Latinos and Mexicans and people from South America, are operating in this country outside the law, to the point where the business community are taking advantage of them? Steve, is to oppress someone, an immigrant or any person, for economic gain, that is certainly outside of religion. But why is it, do you think, with all the masjids, with all the synagogues, with all the churches we have, that we have not effect change in this regard? What do you think we could do differently?
We could start by remembering where we came from ourselves. and respecting those who brought us here, particularly those who brought us here by choice, we can start by remembering that, and as Safi, long before you were saying it, I put in the chat Psalm 24 so that everybody would be reminded the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they who dwell therein. You know, it starts there. It starts in Genesis with creation, even before Abraham. When God animates us by breathing life into us and teaches us that we're created in the image of a God who we cannot see and who does not have image. What does that mean, if not that my brother has the same flame burning in him or her that I have burning in me? Because we were all created from the original man and the original woman by God. There is no hierarchy here except that which humanity has created for itself. And it's the ruining of the golden rule to become those who have the gold make the rules. We know the importance of the golden rule.
Yes, go ahead.
We all have a form of it in our own traditions, and they all sound remarkably the same.
Yes. You sparked something in Kori. She wants to speak now.
Yeah, well, and I think it was part of your initial question too of what, you know, of like how do we make a shift? And I think sometimes, or I think at least within the Protestant Christian churches that I have been a part of that are predominantly white, that often when we have hearts for justice and for the immigrant, we still at times have a view of people who come here as someone that we give our charity to, like as something that we, you know, they have a tale of woe, and, you know, we are here to welcome you, but you're still other. Like it's as long as you are, you know, we are bequeathing goodness upon you by welcoming you here. And as long as that's I'm being a little bit facetious in my movements, but as long as that's still the dynamic, I don't think that we see change, because it's from the perspective as though you have nothing to offer us. It's as though, you know, you're welcome if you can play by our rules. You're welcome if you could assimilate into our culture. And again, it's that power dynamic. There's less of a willingness to have a reciprocity. You have something to offer that we can learn from, and let's do that together. And it's not going to look the same as what it was. We can't go, you know, once you are here, we are changed, and therefore this must change moving forward, and it's not going to look like it once did.
No, I become transactional.
Yes,
we become transactional. Which
Yeah.
means we cannot see each other as neighbors.
Yes. And we definitely cannot see the human benefit of another individual, and that becomes the real challenge. I mean, you look at our hospitals and our universities. Some of the kids that are graduating or top of the class are newly immigrants, and so we kind of overlook the sheer wealth of that is being given to us by someone immigrating here. Dawud, we talk about this often, that there seems to be a real problem with the narrowness of race and racism. I'd like to get your view on that in terms of how we are maybe blind to the sheer humanity of the immigrants.
I don't believe when I talk to people that they're blind to the humanity. And that's a big we that you put out there, right?
Sure.
That we are blind to the humanity of the immigrants.
Right.
I think the reality is, as I was listening to everyone else talk, I was reminded again, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Black History Month, right? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. conducted Medgar Evers and others, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, conducted a moral civil rights argument based on a shared or an appeal to the shared understanding of the country's Judeo-Christian heritage and the higher principles of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Right, that was the moral foundation for this. The NAACP came with the legal arguments, but that was the moral foundation. After the signing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, because there was no corresponding economic policy, Dr. King was back on the streets again with the Poor People's Campaign. so I'm like, once again, I'm channeling, Black History Month is Malcolm X. We're going to keep it plain, right? Be direct. Is that I do agree, you have to, you should come from the moral position, but if you don't have some kind of corresponding economic strategy, it's rarely sustainable. I mean, that's the reality. I'll just say that, and let's not forget, bringing it back to the Islamic tradition. And I mentioned the early Muslim community conducted 2 immigrations. And people don't talk about a lot, except in the Muslim community, the first immigration to Ethiopia, and then the Hijra to Mecca. But one of the reasons that they were such a problem was not that they were conducting the moral arguments, because they were, one God, justice, stop burying your infant daughters, free the slaves, give women equal rights. The leaders at the time said this is going to undermine our political economic establishment, and these Muslims have to go. You know what I mean? So if these are wonderful words. This is a man, the Prophet Muhammad, who we thought was illiterate, and he's blazing with poetry now that we hadn't heard before. And we might even listen to this, if not for the fact that they understood that this was going to undermine their political economic power. So there always has to be this lead with the moral, but what is the legal and political strategy, and how do you work with people to try to affect that? Because I don't believe, even when I talk, I know people who voted for this administration, Black and white, who don't deny the humanity of the immigrants. They're not denying their humanity. What they're saying is, my eggs cost too much. My gas costs too much. I can't find a place to live. You know what I mean? Right. So the reality is, and these are people who go in the church, masjid, they're going to different places, right? They're going to places of worship. They're reading the text, but when they go to the voting booth, they vote their economic and political interests. And I think that's the cold, hard reality of dealing with these kind of issues. And even when you're coming from the position of, clergy or religious organizations, and I think that's one of the things that I've always appreciated about the Quran, is that it's a comprehensive theological, economic, political argument that's been made to understand what it means to truly worship Allah, one God. This is a message for those who would truly worship God. You know what I mean? So that's I don't know if that answers your question.
It's a good answer, Dawud. It's a very good answer. It gives us a lot to think about. Dr. Kaskas, you are a new immigrant. I think you stand, in my view, as an excellent example of a quality of the new immigrants that's coming here, and we seem to, even if we're concentrating on our economics, we overlook the value of the human being that's coming here. I mean, the sheer value of, even if they have no degree, no money, no resources, just the quality of being human is it should mean something that these creatures are created by God. And it should have some meaning and relevance. What say you?
I'm a practicable person. I don't like.
That's right. You're a business guy. Yeah.
I don't like to talk in generalities or in theory. You asked me a few minutes ago a very good question. You said, if you were a president and you're in the White House, what would you do? Now it's time to recognize I'm neither the president nor in the White House, but I am a citizen, which is very important to me, according to our Constitution. I can change the world. I change the world by sitting down with you and talking to you And we're talking to Dawud and talking to Steve and talking to Kori, and none of the people on this screen today will disagree that the greatest commandment is to love God and to love your neighbor like yourself. One day I conducted a study on 24th Street, short street, where I went, and I knocked on the door of everybody. It was around 11 in the morning, so the lady would open the door and say, "Do you love God?" She said, "Yes." "Do you love your neighbor?" "Yes." "How do you show your love for your neighbor?" Huh? Everybody told me they love God and they love their neighbor. None, not even one, told me what they are doing to demonstrate the love for their neighbor. Let me tell you what I will do to love my neighbor today. I will conduct a campaign, starting with you and I and Steve and everybody here, and we will start getting signatures asking for people to reconsider what we're doing and try to treat everybody like an equal, like us. I am my neighbor, you know? So we need to do something, and it needs to be practical. And practically, as a citizen, I can go in front of the Congress, stand, carry a sign, go in and start speaking to congressmen or speak to senators, my own representatives, and prepare a plan and send it to the president. He might not like it, but at least I would have made a point. I would have thought about it and send it to him. On the other hand, he might even call me and tell me that he's going to send me back to Lebanon, which is fine. You know, I'm 82 years old. I don't care. I can live anywhere. So.
I think that the how to, even in the religious sense, tends to negate or escape our religious expressions. I think that one of the things I found interesting in studying Islam was in fact that the prophet not only had the moral fortitude to be supportive of immigration and immigrants, but also he had a specific plan in which to accomplish it. You know, his walk back to Medina was so rich with the moral fervor and method that he won the day. I mean, it's so rich that it starts our religious calendar, which is quite satisfying to a lot of people. But I can say that the how-to in our religious institutions tend to be missing a little bit. But let me just give Kori the last word here. Kori, what say you? Should religious institutions be sanctuaries for the immigrants?
Yes. I think that I think that the I want to be oh gosh, yes. I think that we've talked so much and just thinking of like just the very that question of like, in theory, we want to say that we love our neighbor, and then the how is, how do we show that? I think that was a really just a key, I think a key takeaway that I will bring with me into my next sermon. How do we show this into the community, and thinking about how do we be places that create community, and in terms of like sanctuary in in sort of in a legal sense, yes, sure. I am totally on board with sanctuary communities. However, I don't know that that's, I don't know if that's the way that my people feel called to lead at this time. However, what I do know is that creating spaces of community is essential as a dialogue. Sitting down together and talking, finding ways to dine together, to converse together, to talk together, to begin to break down those labels and those walls, and moving out some of the fear that we tend to have of the other, and really seeing that reciprocal, let's share our gifts with one another. Let's share our food with one another, because that is really the core of it all. That moves us towards the prophet Isaiah talking about the grand banquet in which we're working towards with God.
It is an issue that we have to return to often, and I tell you, I didn't realize how complicated it was. It is, and it's gotten more complicated because we are having to deal with it day to day. Kaskas, go right ahead.
I disagree with asking the question if our places of worship should be a sanctuary.
Okay.
I want our country to be a sanctuary because the earth itself is a sanctuary.
Our concluding lecture is by Dr. Amina Dawud.
And the purpose of it really is to get to the place of a little bit of conversation about Islamic feminism, which I'm considering a methodology for the production and construction of new knowledge in living Islam. You will see that it will include critical reading of the classical intellectual canon of Islam, but with a lens that incorporates gender as a category of thought. Against the backdrop of the Arab Spring and the radical changes that are going on in the Middle East, this lecture focuses on Islam as a global phenomenon. In fact, there are more progressive gender debates in Indonesia than in all of the Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, and Turkish-speaking countries combined. This globalization lens has special benefit when looking at the development of the Muslim women's movement. It also helps to locate my work within that movement and grants it legitimacy. I have worked on gender issues in a way that would lead to Islamic feminism before it had a name and before I could own the word feminism as appropriate for my work and perspective. I do not now, nor have I ever, lost sight of my aim: to make certain articulations towards gender equality within the faith or from a faith perspective. I was born in the West to Christian parents. My sojourn in Islam had nothing to do with Western feminist movements because they tended to marginalize women of color, poor women, and non-heterosexual women. My principal motivation in the gender debates is linked to my spiritual yearnings. For God is bigger than any discourse, acts in ways not fathomable to human beings at all, and yet is intimately connected to each human being, even if they choose not to respond to that living presence or reality. So this benevolence is not intended to offend or to be imposed on people who do not believe in God. I say this instead because it is important to my location and to focus on theological elements in the debates over women's empowerment in the context of Islam. We cannot say anything about Islam and Muslims until we're clear what we mean by Islam. Every discussion about Islam and women must begin with the meaning of the word Islam. People involved with the struggle for or against Islamic reform often operate on a presumption that there is a uniform agreement on the meaning of the word. When people say, for example, Islam is a violent religion, or Islam means peace, or Islam prohibits homosexuality, or in Islam you must wear hijab, the source of such abstractions is frequently not provided. One important development that the women's movement helped to forge in international discourse at the end of the 20th century was the distinction between Muslim cultures and Islamic primary sources, that is, the Quran, the established Sunnah, authentic Hadith, and sometimes Islamic law or fiqh. And it's funny because in trying to get people to move away from certain static notions of Islam, even people who are working in progressive Islamic circles tend to defer back to these kind of conservative definitions when they're talking about Islam. So they make themselves as a response to or reaction or an alternative of. And part of what I'm trying to do is to get Islam to be, once again, more dynamic. In the Quran, the word Islam and Muslim are both used with reference to an historical community and to the state or posture, and to a state or posture vis-a-vis all of creation, the posture of conscientious surrender to the harmony of the universe. Indeed, the Quran says all of nature is Muslim. All of creation is harmonious, following a certain order with balance between its constituent parts. In all of my discussions about Islam and about Muslim women, I build upon a definition of Islam encapsulated by its most basic and fundamental principle, Tawheed. There is no Islam without Tawheed. At its most fundamental level, it refers to God as one. For matters of social justice, it refers to the more intensified form of its syntactical origin, the making of one from fragments, that is diversity or plurality. It could be then defined as unity. The social principle of Tawheed mandates a relationship between human beings of equality and reciprocity. The other question we have to figure out when we discuss Islam and women is, what is the role of women in Islam? I work only on the basis of an understanding that the role of a woman is to be a Khalifa on the earth, a moral agent of Allah within the sacred order of balance and harmony in the universe. This teleology is confirmed by the Quranic passage, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, indeed I will create an agent on the earth. Woman was not created as a byproduct of, helpmate for, or second-class citizen to man. Furthermore, her agency is in a direct relationship to God, unmitigated by men's agency, or by family. This agency is to be manifest by actions fil ard, in the creation, or literally on the earth, standing up for justice and gender equality, working to reform asymmetrical gender policies, and toppling tyrannical practices and epistemologies are thus essential to an agent as part of the human-divine relationship. These aspects of justice work are all mandated by Allah and established by the prophetic Sunnah. Coincidentally, this is the same as the role of men in Islam. Women are human. They do not depend upon men for their humanity. It is given to them by Allah. While women have always been a part of the community, expected to conform to the development of Islam within that community, in the early development of the foundational paradigms of Islamic thought and practice, they did not enjoy equal participation in establishing the fundamental understanding of what is Islam. In fact, as the Muslim empire spread geographically and politically, especially after the Abbasid period, women's contributions to the fundamental canon of Islam would be further marginalized and ultimately silenced. This had a profound effect on the future of Islamic thought and in the establishment of both legitimacy and authority. If we look back over Islamic history from our vantage point, we see a very minor role that women played in establishing the basic epistemology that would come to stand as authority or legitimacy. For example, in the 12th century, the famous and prolific scholar Ahmed al-Ghazali symbolized the agent